While the early Rubber Hose cartoons were an obvious inspiration for this film, I was also inspired by the late great anime director Satoshi Kon. He would do really experimental and cool transitions between scenes, and one thing that he would do often was objects wiping the screen and seamlessly going into the next scene. So all these shots, they didn't have these hard cuts. You'd see things coming into the screen and then wiping the screen and opening up into the next shot. So I did that a lot on this sequence, especially where the end of every beat, it opens up into a new scene. On this shot where Venom eats Dr. Octopus, I animated this on 3s, which was effectively 8 frames a second. Since the whole film is 24 frames a second, I normally drew everything on 2s, which means each drawing would be on screen for 2 frames, which would make it technically 12 frames a second. This shot, each drawing is held for 3 frames. So it has a little bit of a slower feel as he's falling into the mouth. And to just kind of wrap my head around animating this motion, really the first thing I did was just animate Dr. Octopus's body as a ball. So I just literally just drew frames like this as he's going in, and I just made a ball shape and then added the little details like his little feet and little butt crack. I added all that later. So always just start out with the simple shapes first and then add things like tentacles and other stuff coming out of it. On this shot of Doc Ock rowing to the Statue of Liberty, this is what it looks like on rough animation, frame by frame. We drew Doc Ock and the special effects of the water splashes shooting out. And the first part of this section is on 1s, but then as he gets far away and it was all tiny, I did it on 2s, so it'd be a little slower. The thing I was really paying special attention to on this shot was these paddles, making sure that the oars are following this arcing shape as they move along. Here, Doc Ock is frantically running to the rowboat. He enters screen left and flies off screen right. So there's a big path of motion here. And instead of just having him, sitting into the rowboat all boringly, we wanted to give him a pose where he's just jumping in the air. And so this pose, I really focused on the silhouette to have his fingers all spread out like this and have his body language just be really spread apart and his tentacles stretching from the speed of his run as he plops into the rowboat. And the rowboat is just a single drawing, and when he goes into it, I just moved it slightly, little by little, and have it bounce in and then start to move out and ease out into individual drawings. This water here is just on a cycle. When you have limited time, make use of cycles. This is the first drawing I drew for this shot. It's a frame directly from the storyboard, and this is basically the master frame, the key frame that I'm basing all the other drawings around. So as the car comes into frame, it settles here. As you can see on my timeline, I hold this pose for several frames. So it has the most screen time, and I wrote some notes to help me remember things I wanted to add. Like over here, these are stretchy eyes, so that when the car takes off, the eyes are gonna stretch off screen. Hang time, this is just little scribbles that help me remember what I'm thinking. And so the hang time just means that the parts of the car don't all leave at the same time. So pay attention up here on the taxi sign. This stays on screen for a while as the rest of the car is accelerating off screen and stretching off screen. The taxi sign takes a while to zoom in, and then we go all the way into the A, and it's a little screaming character. So this is what it looks like. And to help me with this motion, I drew this motion path. This is a guideline to help me figure out how the car is going to be moving to keep an elegant flow, and also where to put the tires and the edges of the car. So I drew this kind of guide here for these tires. Drawing these arcs really helps you keep the motion from stuttering or looking kind of awkward, and with the rubber hose style you definitely want things to be fluid and elastic. A note about the composition of this scene: this whole section up here has a lot of detail, and you don't want every part of your scene to have a ton of detail. That can be fatiguing. It's all about contrast. The point of highest contrast draws our eye, but if you have too many points of high contrast or high detail, it's fatiguing and you don't know where to look. So this whole road section is very simple, with just a little bit of texture to keep it from just being a flat, boring color. And this way, when the car comes on screen, there's information happening in this simple area, and it lets the car exist in this space without it being too cluttered. And on this part, as the uvula is coming in, it's transparent, and I overlaid this over the next scene to make it connect seamlessly as a transition. For this scene, I was inspired by Ralph Bakshi's Cool World, more specifically the background paintings in that movie by Barry Jackson. He painted these nightmarish acrylic backdrops of this city with distorted faces and like these smoking buildings and kind of roller coastery type contraptions growing out of the city. So when Venom overtakes the city, he actually fuses with the city and becomes part of the buildings. So you can see all these Venom type buildings with pipes growing out of them and all that kind of stuff. I've never actually finished a Ralph Bakshi movie. I appreciate individual scenes from it and I appreciate the style, but I just find the films a little difficult to get through because they're so meandering and sort of lose focus of what the main point is. And in that regard, they can be a little bit boring. Kind of like me. For the dance scene, the first thing I did was draw a couple thumbnails. One reason just to show the emotion of the scene and how it's going to be a Venom kind of morphing around doing weird stuff. This whole scene was rotoscoped from Cab Calloway's dance Minnie the Moocher, which is also a sequence that has been rotoscoped by Fleischer Studios in the Betty Boop cartoons. So since the whole rubber hose animation short is a callback to those early Fleischer films, I wanted to do my own Venom interpretation of this dance. So the first thing I actually did when roughing out this dance was just draw the feet frame by frame, since the whole structure of this animation is based on the placement of the feet. And then from there, I did the hands, which were the next most important thing for communicating the expression and emotions. Just roughed in the body over it and gave Venom some thick cheeks. And then once all that was done, I started kind of inventing stuff like this bullet bill that shoots out of his head. There's a spider pork, whatever that, Spider Ham, or I don't know, I forget his name, but from the Spider-Verse movie. And then of course I did cleanup on another layer with white, and then just had Venom smacking his cheeks at the end. So this whole animation was drawn on ones, and it was over 140 frames. So this one sequence alone took over a week to complete, but I think it was worth it, and it's kind of the showpiece of the film. The intro scene was all about taking advantage of cycles and panning backgrounds. So you can see that these characters here, this parking meter and the fire hydrant, are just looping the same action, and they're bound to the foreground that Eddie Brock is walking on. And then in the background, you have some shops and buildings with eyes, so everything feels alive. And this little pizza guy, he's part of the background layer, and he's on his own cycle. The very, very foreground, you have this blurred lamppost that goes by to create a little bit more depth. I just drew that and then blurred it when I had it going by. And then for these characters, I just had my own project file that I animated these characters in. So these characters were assets that could be put into the background to keep the background feeling a little bit more alive, because in the old cartoons, even inanimate objects can be alive. My animation partner Brittany Penn cleaned up the animation in this project, but she also cleaned up my background pictures. So here's an example of a scene where it's the rough background with a color guide, or value tone guide rather, since it's black and white. And here is Brittany's finished rendering where she adds shading and texture. If you enjoyed this video, there's more like it from the playlist on the screen. And some other things, I have a Patreon. You can click the subscribe button if you want to see more. Like the video if you liked it. Okay, and bye-bye. And bye-bye. And bye-bye.